Greeting everybody. So previously we looked at testing reading, in which we discussed the important aspects a teacher should know before designing a reading test, which includes the operations, the types of text, the addressees, the topics, and the criteria levels of performance. Meanwhile, testing listening is quite similar in more ways than one to testing reading, simply because they are both receptive skills. So just like testing reading, testing listening first requires that we teachers specify what the candidates or the students should be able to do. And to discover that, teachers need to look at a few things, such as the operations, types of texts, addressees, topics, and setting criteria levels of performance. So let us start by understanding what we mean by testing listening. You might think that listening should not be tested separately because to listen means speaking is involved, so that there is an exchange of information, right? However, in actual listening tests, students don't speak or need to have a conversation with anyone to show their listening ability. This is because in a listening test, students are seated and required to listen to a radio, a lecture, a conversation, etc. alone, and they are also required to complete a series of test items. So it is actually right. It's okay to consider that testing speaking should be done alongside testing listening, but sometimes it's just too difficult or not practical to do so. Maybe there isn't enough time, equipment, or trained testers for that. The thing is, well, people say that listening test indirectly improves oral ability, like speaking, which therefore creates this positive backwash effect. And I guess students psychologically interact with what they hear through test items to understand the speaker's views or messages in the audios or recordings. I guess that should explain why this creates a positive backwash effect. In this case, the listening test helps improve speaking, even though speaking isn't tested directly. So with that being said, let us specify what test takers, candidates, or students should be able to do in our listening test. To do so, we first need to have a clear operation. If you remember clearly from the previous video, operation means what the listener has to do to understand or respond to what they hear. And just like reading, it also has different levels of analysis. The macro skills for a listening test include listening for specific information, understanding the overall message or the gist of what they hear, following directions in a map or a process of something, or following instructions. These macro skills are what we call the big picture, and they require a much deeper analysis from students in order to respond, right, to test items as they are listening to the audio. And then we have micro skills, which are the underlying skills that students need in order to interpret a message, an idea, or a meaning behind speakers' words. Therefore, the underlying skills or micro skills include things like the interpretation of intonation that will help them recognize different attitudes of a speaker. Okay, whether it is sarcasm or serious or funny, sad, polite or rude, etc. These could also include things like recognizing the various structures speakers use in their interaction, okay, such as using specific phrases to ask a question, to make a request, right, to make an offer, to make a promise even, to state an opinion or a fact. Speakers normally use certain structures, certain fixed phrases to indicate those. So these underlying skills will help students recognize at least what they are going to listen for and respond to test items appropriately. So after choosing an operation that suits your purpose and objectives, we can start selecting the types of text to achieve our objectives. While testing reading, types of text include written materials such as novels or articles or stories, etc. The types of text for testing listening include a monologue, which basically means students listening to a one-person talk in the form of a lecture or a long presentation. A dialogue, meaning that students listen to a conversation or an interaction of some sort between two people. And then multi-participants, an interaction of more than two people. Or they may be required to listen to an announcement or an instruction or directions in order to complete a roadmap or a process of how something works. In the end, you choose the one that fits your students and your course objectives. Moving on from that, we have the addressees. Just like in other tests, it means the audience that is going to take the listening test. So a proper test is designed with this goal in mind, with a clear audience in mind and a clear purpose. Is it for the general students, the general audience? Is it for your students? Is it for your classroom? Or is it for young learners in general, right? So you need to consider who is going to listen to your listening, right? A listening test to be exact. In terms of topics or themes, this can be general. However, if you remember how you choose topics for testing reading, your topic should still be somewhat authentic and generally known by your students or candidates to a certain extent, not too much, because we don't want them to like use their background knowledge to answer test items for them. And when it comes to criteria setting, criteria levels of performance, again, it is between norm referenced or criterion referenced because these are both receptive skills, and I include reading, testing reading. And just like testing reading, testing listening benefits more from criterion referenced because we need to set a required scores for students to get in order to pass the test, and they should represent their listening ability without having to compare them compare their scores to other students. If the students manage to get the required scores, then they pass. If everyone can get it, everyone passes. So now that we have specified what our candidates and students should be able to do in the listening test, we can start setting the task. Now keep in mind, this is a little bit different from testing reading. When setting the task and choosing listening speech, it is ideal to determine whether your audience is native or non-native. If your students are native, then authentic speech is more suitable for them. Non-native students benefit more from speeches that simulate, right, authentic interaction. It is not fully authentic, but it is made or produced specifically or in a way for non-natives. So if you have like taken listening tests somewhere before, which I'm sure you must have done, you will realize now that the speeches, the way the speakers speak in those audios are often not too fast, right? Not too slow either. And they appear to be authentic, but not in a way that two real people, speak. But, it seems a bit rehearsed, right? They produce clear, perfect pronunciation and all these sorts of things. But you have to keep in mind as well that you can find materials or sample authentic speeches from various sources on the internet. It is not generally recommended that you produce your own speeches. It's not good, because we need real interaction, and you can find all of these, on the internet. It's not recommended that we make one ourselves. And we need to ensure that the recordings, the audios, the speeches are clear, audible, loud, right? So that a student's listening ability is not affected by that. Which brings us to the writing of items for your listening test. So what test methods should be put in the listening test? Before answering the questions, there are a few things you need to know before you start writing and choosing test methods. Firstly, if your listening is long, like a lecture or a presentation, that, as a test designer, it is important to listen to the audio and note down the information students will need to deal with the test items that you give to them. Secondly, the answer for each item in the test should be a bit far apart, not too close to one another. Otherwise, they won't have, time to write their answers down, and the next answer has passed them, and it is not their fault at all. So make sure that you leave spaces or select, or write test items in a way that it leaves some spaces, right, for students to, write down the answers when they have caught them, in the audio. And you don't want it to be like too close to one another, because they may have missed it by chance because they did not expect or don't expect it to be like one right after another. There should be like a little bit of space in between each answer for each item. Keywords and synonyms of keywords should appear in both the test items and the audio, so this will help students anticipate, right, what they are about to hear. And that's why we used to be taught that we should underline keywords in test items, in sentences, in questions, so that we can expect what we are going to listen for. And next, students should be given time to read the test items before listening. Of course, you want to give students some minutes, some seconds to go through all the test items first before you play the audio, so that they know what to anticipate, what keywords they should look out for, watch out for, and all these good stuff. And last but not least, just like in testing reading, answers for each item should follow a subsequent order. For example, the answer for item number 10 should not be found at the beginning of the speech, right? We want it to be in order that the students can hear. Unless, well, your question is about the main idea. In that case, students will have to get the gist of the overall presentation or lecture in order to answer that question. So here are the possible techniques or test methods that you can make use of in your listening test, and surprise, surprise, they are very similar to testing reading. But before I go through these, which I am not going to in detail, because I would like you to go through how you can construct multiple choice questions in the book itself. I believe the explanation is given to you very clearly, very detailed, so there's no need for me to repeat what is already written in the book. And it's not that long either, it's pretty short, so please go ahead and go through them on your own. But here are what you need to know about each possible technique. For the first one is multiple choice, which basically means you have multiple options for students to choose from. But what you need to know about multiple choice is that the alternatives, right, the choices must be kept short and simple. You don't want your choices to be too long, unlike reading. In testing reading, MCQs have choices that are pretty long, not too long either, but they can be quite long, right? They can be like an actual sentence, for example. But in listening, you want it to be a little bit shorter, not too long, right? Not too long. It can be a sentence, but simple, understandable, because you don't want students to read and understand you're not testing reading. That's what I'm trying to say. And then we have short answer, right? Items can work with listening tests as well. Basically listen and provide and answer the question with no more than 3 words or something. And then the information transfer, again, involves such activities as the labeling of diagrams, picture, completing forms, showing routes on map, It goes back to listening for instructions, listening for directions. In IELTS, these are present here and there. Okay, and you are required to listen and then label the diagrams. Okay, labeling the maps, identifying places on a map, right? Okay, this is what we call information transfer. Completing forms, completing a summary. Okay, note taking, yes, we have the ability to take notes while listening to, say, a lecture. It is in note taking is not that common, right? It's not that common. Instead of an actual test item in a test or test method in a test, this is a sub skill, right? An underlying skill of a student instead of the, you know, bigger picture kind of skill. For this one is the partial dictation. This one, again, like I said, you don't normally see these unless you are teaching a very low, okay, low level students, where you feel like you want to administer some dictation where students have to listen to your pronunciation and see whether they can identify or recognize the words being said to them. But again, like I said, it's not really common. You won't ever see these in our context in Cambodia. Recording or live presentation will never happen. It's never existed in our context. Even in standardized testing, there is no such thing as a live presentation. And recording, yes, we have recording, and basically it's the only standard that we have here, where students are required to listen to a recording, but just have to make sure that the recording, you know, uh, are suitable. It is clear, it is audible, just like I said earlier. You know what I mean, right? Okay, unless the recording is made purposely to like confuse students. For example, you must have listened to like a radio, a phone call between two people where the voice isn't clear because it's on the line, right? It's calling. That's why the voice is not clear, which is pretty understandable. That is purposely made for students to make it authentic. Okay, but in other words, presentation or live presentation, to be exact, is never gonna happen here in our test. So just like reading, listening also takes a very simple scoring. Basically, it is very objective. There's only one correct answer, and yeah, since you're only testing their listening ability, there is no reason for you to deduct points or errors of grammar or spelling if that is the intended word for that space or column or that choice. However, there is one thing you need to remember in our context, right? In at least specifically speaking for IFL, we actually care about spelling and grammar. So if, let's say, you are asked to like complete a note and you do not write the correct spelling of the word, even though it is that word but comes with the incorrect spelling, it's wrong, basically, because we kind of want to encourage students to pay attention to these things. However, if it's not like that serious, if it's not something that your objective, or something you care about more than the actual listening ability, then there is no need for you to deduct point, right? Okay, but like I said, it's very objective. There's only one correct answer, but you judge them based on the criterion level of a performance. Okay, if they get like say 25, then they pass. If everybody in your class gets 25, they all pass. Get what I mean? We are not using norm reference. We are not comparing and selecting just the top 3, the top 5 here.